There is a scene in The Empire Strikes Back that I always found hilarious. It is when Luke has just visited Yoda's hut for the first time, and he goes to dip up some of Yoda's root leaf, which Yoda proudly claims he cooked himself.
Root leaf! I
never understood what Yoda was saying as a kid, but that's not too surprising since I also heard this.
I sense something.
And this.
No, my father didn't fight in the wars. He was a navigator on a spice freight.
The exaggerated look of excitement on Mark Hamill's face as he first scoots over to get some just makes me laugh every time. The naivety of actually thinking that something made by this guy is going to fit your palate is silly enough. But when you know how disappointed Luke is about to be, it creates this feeling of almost not wanting to look at the screen. You just don't want to see the absolute degradation that is coming, the disappointment. I woke up the other day with this scene in my head and I realized something. It's one of those things where you realize something that you kind of already know, but it just hits you in a way like you have to express it, you have to get it out. I am terrified of being the root leaf. I think we all know that feeling. You go out and buy a new CD by one of your favorite artists. Do we even still do that now? You tumble into your car seat, anxiously trying to remove the cellophane, and before the first track has even started, you're already checking out the CD liner notes. And maybe you see something in there that kind of looks a little weird. This album is actually pretty good, by the way. But you're like, okay, give it a chance, let it play out. A few days later, you find yourself thumbing through your CD collection for that old standby, and you just put that on, because that new album just didn't really cut the mustard. It's not that stage of the disappointment that's sad, though. It's that first listen when you don't know what to expect. You are Luke Skywalker, scooting over to that pot of root leaf with a huge smile on your face, just anticipating how great it's going to be, and then it's just not. So back in the 80s, when video cassette recorders, or VCRs, were all the rage, we went to the local Blockbuster all the time to rent movies, and sometimes we would also rent a VCR. We would play the movie from the rented VCR into our VCR, I'm going somewhere with this, I promise, using our VCR to record a copy that we could keep. I remember this one night when we rented a movie and a VCR, and something went wrong with the VCR. I don't remember what it was. All I remember is my dad getting irate and even a little physically rough with it. I don't remember if we ever got it working. I just remember that this was one of the first times that overwhelming sadness started to wash over me. This poor VCR rented out to hundreds of people to be used and abused by them like a prostitute. I've heard that sympathy for inanimate objects is kind of a thing with introverts, which I would truly consider myself to be. Anyway, beside the point, it wasn't the abuse that made me sad, really. It was just the thought of Dad carrying the VCR up to the house with a huge smile on his face, the expectation that was bound to not be met. I mean, obviously, he wasn't actually walking up to the house with a huge smile on his face with the VCR in his hands, no. But it's weird because that's what expectations look like to me. They look like this. For the longest time, well into my 20s and early 30s even, I used to say that money is not the root of all evil, expectations are. I don't agree with that anymore. I believe expectations could be the root of all disappointment, but to live a life without expectations could arguably be just as sad as expectations not being met. I never even realized that it was the concept of expectations that sometimes made me feel the way I did, until I heard the Robbie Williams song. Robbie, not Robin. Oh, it's called Singing for the Lonely, there we go. And in that song, he has this random line where he says, "I'm so sick of people's expectations, leaves me tired all the time." It was just so blunt the way he said it. It set off a fuse in my brain, where every time I looked at my life, or things that I found irritating or annoying or whatever, I would always be able to trace it back to, oh, it's expectations. And again, it's like, I can't stress this enough. I don't think expectations are fundamentally bad. It's just I have a bad relationship with them, I guess. I can't help but think of this scene from the TV show Lost, in which Saeed and Shannon are first starting to develop feelings for each other. Shannon tells him that she wants to take it slow and asks if he is okay with that. His response is, "I had no expectations," which could be kind of a sad response if not for how he follows it up. Hopes, not expectations. I think it's one of the sweetest lines I've ever heard in a show before. He somehow managed to take expectations out of the equation entirely, while still letting her know that he's into her. I'm not really sure what I'm getting at here. The same thing happens with all sorts of things in life. You go see a movie, but it sucks, and you end up walking out the theater. But it's not the walking out part that's sad, it's the smiles of anticipation as you're just walking in with your nachos and half-gallon of soda. You have an expectation, and your investment is going straight down the toilet.
The toilet.
Perhaps if it had been hope, not expectation, that would be a different story. I don't know, I almost think this whole thing is just a convoluted way of me saying that disappointment is sad. Like, yeah, no shit, it's sad. But I haven't been too disappointed with life lately, and that is kind of a double-edged sword, because I think it makes me more acutely aware of how terrified I am of ever, being the disappointment, being the root leaf. Of course, I kind of make it sound like replacing expectations with hopes somehow makes the disappointment not happen. And no, I mean, with hopes, you can still be let down. I guess I just feel like hope is less about controlling people, where expectations could lead to consequences if they're not met. I actually used to think that control was one of the 7 deadly sins. I think because of a line from Final Fantasy IX, but I'm not sure. But this is a topic that may need to be its own video, because holy crap, I could go on. Or I could go off. Anyway. We can talk all day about music albums, movies, video games, or anything else that is prone to disappoint us, but it becomes 10 times more sad when it's a person. And I'm not just talking about, like, having a whole-on falling out. I'm just talking about that first few minutes, that first impression when everything matters. You've just met for the first time, you shook hands, fist bumped, or whatever, and then in that slow, agonizing few minutes, they realize that you're not very good at looking people in the eyes. Maybe you barely do it at all. But eye contact is not something that people hope for. It's something that they expect. And if you don't meet that, chances are you're going to be the root leaf. Quick aside here, I know this title card is talking about autism, and I don't really mention autism much in this video. I've looked many times into the difference between introvert and autism before, and always found that I fall under a little bit of both. I've never been officially diagnosed, though. I only bring it up now because the stuff I say in this video, I don't know whether it's coming from my introverted side or my autistic side, if it exists. So most of the time I just say introvert, maybe just as a means of erring on the side of caution. Anyway, back to it. To me, looking at people in the eyes feels like watching somebody through binoculars, or even just from a distance, and they suddenly notice you. Every time that happens in the movies, it's always like this big scary moment. Inception, Rear Window, What Lies Beneath. So why is it not scary in real life? I thought of an answer to this decades ago, because the whole point of watching somebody through binoculars is so that you're not seen by the other person. So maybe it's just that I don't want to be seen. Apparently there's a name for that too. It's called scopophobia. I only just learned that word earlier this year. I'm 48, by the way. It's so weird because I almost feel like I'm the exact opposite from the way most people are, in the sense that if I turn up in some random person's photograph in the background, I just don't care. Like, I'm more scared of somebody who's literally 10 feet away at the gym, at the mall, at the bowling alley. Somebody who could actually do something like follow me out to my car. I don't mean to be dismissive about people's feelings about being photographed, because cameras are unflattering, and if somebody's trying to film you without your permission, then yeah, that would creep me out too. I haven't really used the word introvert much here, but it's been in the back of my head for most of the time. I've always wondered, why am I like this? Why are we like this? I don't think you have to be an introvert to be afraid of disappointing people. Everybody's afraid of that. But I think it might just be that part of what makes us the way we are is that our fear is not rooted in a possibility. We're not scared of possibly disappointing someone. We're scared of knowing that we're going to. Gee, how pessimistic is that? But what are people supposed to do about that? I mean, is it even fair to expect them to understand? I can't speak for all introverts, but if the rest of them are anything like me, we don't have a lot of expectations, because we know how much expectations give us anxiety, and the last thing we want to do is to hoist that anxiety, even potential anxiety, onto someone else's shoulders. So we don't expect from them. In fact, we'll go out of our way to communicate to them that we don't have expectations of them. I think maybe this is why introverts are known to fidget, because that's definitely why I do it. I do it to look busy. I do it to appear preoccupied, so there's no chance that someone else will have to deal with the anxiety of me expecting something from them and being disappointed. When I'm at the cash register getting my stuff rung up, for example, I play around with the cards in my wallet. Usually I'll hold the corner of one of the cards with my mouth while I rearrange the other ones, just to really lay it on thick how preoccupied I am. Because what else am I going to do? Look at them. They're already meeting my expectations by ringing my stuff up. Why do I need to keep monitoring their activity? But I don't want to look bored either, because maybe that'll come across like I'm not happy with how fast they're going. I need to do everything in my power to not create anxiety for them, because I know how that feels. I know how it feels to be stared at like an animal in a cage who's just there to perform for you, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody. I just want to let them do their own thing and mind my own business, because they're not having a good day. They're at work and I'm not.
You're in the wheelchair, and I'm not.
You don't even want to see me when I go to Subway. Of course, I guess it's all too easy to overlook the fact that if you're fidgeting, that also probably comes across like you're nervous, which in turn is going to make the other person think that they're the reason for it, and that creates anxiety for them. So it's like, you can't really win either way, I don't know. There's so many small things that I just don't do because it feels like I'm hoisting expectations if I do it. I never said good morning to people at work because that came with the expectation of them to say it back. And so many of them were so pissed off all the time that I didn't dare. It's funny because I don't mind when people say it to me. If I'm at a red light trying to make a right turn and there's one person in front of me and they're going straight, I don't turn on my right blinker because I don't want to make them feel guilty for being there. I don't say stuff like, come on, because I feel like it's implying that the person I'm saying it to is off. I've just always had problems with paying attention. I'll be in the middle of playing a video game and I'll just start thinking about breathing, and then I'll start manually breathing. Or I'll think of this stupid thing that I said at work one day and how I had to repeat it 3 times and they still couldn't understand what I was saying, probably because I was making a Secret of Mana reference. And I'm like, shut up, brain, I'm trying to do a sick combo here. I remember Mom getting on my case one day when I was in the 8th grade because my teachers had told her that I wasn't paying attention in class. And she said this thing, I can still hear it in my head, what she said to me, and the way she said it. She was like, even Miss Williams used to say you didn't pay attention in class. Miss Williams was my 1st grade teacher. 35 years and I can still hear that conversation in my head. This was a problem with me and I just needed to fix it. I can't tell you how many times when I was little, before we had cell phones, when the phone would ring, the initial reaction would be, damn it! And the first word that was spoken after hanging up would be, shit. Like conversation itself was just this huge burden or something. And part of me is like, yeah, it totally is. While another part of me is like, geez, is it really that bad? I guess when you're being hounded by bill collectors, that would be a thing though, wouldn't it? A lot of the videos I've been watching lately have referred to this kind of thing as demand avoidance. This is why you always hear people's butt clench when they hear the phrase, we need to talk. Because when you hear that, you know it's usually, not always, but usually one of 2 things. New expectations are coming, or old expectations haven't been met. This is also why a lot of times in video essays on YouTube, you hear somebody go on a tangent in a video, but before doing it, they'll stop and say something like, hey, fuck you, it's my video, I talk about what I want, I go on a tangent if I want. This is why every 2 hours when the question pops up on Ask Reddit of what do you miss about the 1990s, the top answers are always something like that they miss the feeling of going out into the world and just being disconnected, of not being tethered to a machine. Which, at least to me, feels like a roundabout way of saying they miss when there were fewer expectations, or at the very least, fewer ways for those expectations to get to you. This is why people say that Navi in Ocarina of Time is annoying. Like, I don't know, what is it that they hate about what she's saying? All she's saying is, hey, listen. It's like they don't want to be stopped, they don't want to be interrupted, they don't want the expectation of them to listen. I mean, I'm not sure what it actually is. Is it really just adversity to conversation in general, or I'm not sure. Like, another one is you always hear people talking about how much it sucks to work in retail. There were times when it definitely got to me. Like, I remember this one night. I don't know why this crossed my mind the other night, but I was working at a gas station one night, and there was this one person that would come in, and he would get 2 packs of Bel Air brand cigarettes. Anyway, so this one night, he comes in for them, and we don't have any in stock. And he's kind of, a little PO'd about it, but he turns around and leaves and whatever. About a week later, it was actually 6 days later, he comes back asking for them again. And what he does, when he comes up to the counter, he says, you got any Bel Airs 6 days later? It's like he wanted me to feel guilty if they weren't there, because, hey, he waited 6 days for this. They better be there now. Sometimes I'll be in the bathroom washing my hands, and somebody will come in, and they'll stop like 5 feet away from me, and I can just barely see them out of the corner of my eyes, and they're not doing anything or saying anything, and I start thinking, are they waiting for me to do something? Is this another expectation? Is there something weird with the way I look, or how I'm standing? And the whole time, it's probably just them looking at their phone or checking their pockets. And I probably just got all anxious about nothing. I do find that in a few of these examples, I'm sort of conflating expectations and guilt tripping, but the biggest example of an overlap that I can think of in that regard is tailgaters. You know, the ones that get right up on your ass and guilt trip you for not driving faster. Even if you're doing 10 over the speed limit, you're still not meeting their expectations, so they guilt trip you for it. What you're doing is just not good enough for them, and they feel so strongly about this apparent fact that they'll put both you and themselves in danger just to communicate it. Just to really bake in the guilt when they finally do pass you, they do something like this.
Get a room.
Anybody ever see Independence Day? There's this character, Dr. Oaken. Very obviously an introvert. Now, there's this one thing that he does that I think I must be the only one on the planet who notices. When he scans the card to open the doors with the aliens behind them, he does this sort of playful, dancey motion with the card afterward, kind of pulling it in a semicircle toward himself. Why? Why does he do that? Because that's just another example of an introvert trying to appear occupied. Although I think in this case, it's not so much occupied as happy. It's a happy motion. And this is another thing, and again, I don't speak for all introverts here, but acting happy is another way in which I think we try to alleviate any possibility of other people thinking that we are in a bad mood, and therefore eliminating any possibility of them thinking that they might be a part of the reason for it. Growing up, I was terrified of one of my parents being in a bad mood, especially when it escalated physically, and so I find myself doing anything in my power to not create that kind of anxiety in others. I wouldn't even let my mouth rest as a kid, because resting bitch face was a thing even then, before we started calling it that. So I would always try to keep the size of my mouth curled upward, sort of like Dave Matthews or that crazy guy from Zero Time Dilemma. Not like I expected the whole world to be Black Hole Sun or anything, but I also didn't want to take a chance on my default face being a frown, as it appeared to be for a lot of others. All this to say, I think I'm just terrified of expectations, because of just not being able to meet them for most of my life. I still remember this one Tom and Jerry cartoon where Tom is trying to get advice from a book on catching Jerry. The stuff he tries doesn't work, so he tears the book into pieces and angrily stomps on it. And this scene did things to me. My impressionable little mind was racing with anxiety because the book didn't meet Tom's expectations, so he tore it up. If that's how angry not meeting expectations makes you, then who's to say you wouldn't want to do that to a person who didn't meet your expectations? Sure, you wouldn't actually do it, but if the only thing stopping you is society's rule of you shouldn't hurt people, the desire is still there. Like if someone's chained to a wall and they try to lunge at you, you're still probably gonna flinch. This is just how my 8-year-old mind operated. Another cartoon that I must have watched dozens of times as a kid was called Somewhere in Dreamland. It's about a family in poverty. Even the kids' bedding is riddled with holes. So toward the beginning, in this one scene, the mother feeds them something that looks like a rock that becomes chewable if you dip it in milk. After they're done eating, this happens.
I'm still hungry, Mom.
I remember feeling bad for the kids, but I also felt bad for the mother. But even in cases like this, where the expectation for food is perfectly reasonable, it still hurts not being able to meet it. Just afterward, the boy reassures his mom that he was only fooling, essentially retracting his expectations because he saw how much it upset her. It just made me never want to ask for anything. I'm not trying to blame the cartoons for how I turned out or anything, I'm just saying this is just how I interpreted them. It's crazy how many memories associated with cartoons I've been coming up with just in the last 2 weeks while I've been writing this video out. Stuff I haven't thought about in literal decades. And I wouldn't go so far as to say that these memories are traumatizing. I think that's kind of a strong word, and what word is there that goes beyond that, you know? This one scene in which Yosemite Sam tells an old man to hold his breath, I remember feeling so bad for this old man, like I was witnessing a torture scene or something. And the only reason that this guy couldn't breathe is that he was told not to. Obedience, even to the point of putting oneself in peril. The same exact thing happens with this opera singer who has to keep holding the note until his face starts to turn all different colors. Like, I can watch this now and see that, yeah, it's funny, and you would think the colors would be an indication enough to my kid's self that, okay, yeah, this wasn't really happening. And if you don't see faces turn colors like this in the real world, maybe it just meant that you hadn't seen someone in this level of pain before. I didn't know the difference. Another one I used to watch a lot of as a kid was Little Toot. I tried watching it again a few days ago, and I kind of forgot what a little delinquent he was in the first half. Anyway, he gets carted off by the police, and there's some really scary stuff that happens. He finds a ship stuck in a storm, and it's up to him to tow them out. I also forgot that this is how I learned Morse code for SOS. Anyway, he gets tied to the ship and he starts pulling with all his might, and it's just not enough. And here I am thinking, oh god, I know how that feels. Then a lightning bolt comes out of the sky, strikes him in the ass, and gives him the will to pull the ship out. As an adult, I can appreciate that this is like a metaphor for adversity, giving us the strength to overcome. But as a kid, all I saw was torture. Yet again, like using spurs on a horse to make it run faster. It was just like my PE teacher shouting at me to run and I just couldn't. The other thing that gets me about it though is that even after Little Toot starts pulling the ship, even after he meets the expectations, the lightning keeps striking him, as if what he's doing is still not enough. He's still getting punished even after being good. Talk about killing a person's motivation to behave. Like, if you're gonna accuse me of failing anyway, I might as well just keep doing that.
Much as you accuse me, I might as well have.
Yeah, this is seriously unhinged, I tell you. I didn't write that part, I just said that after reading this. Other times, it's just a single line. Garfield Christmas, for example. Yes, I'm seriously bringing up Garfield Christmas right now. So in that one, John goes to wake up Garfield on Christmas morning, and this is what Garfield says.
I don't do pop quizzes before breakfast, okay?
I don't do pop quizzes before breakfast. My kid self loved that line, and probably would have loved it even more without the before breakfast part. I remember this one afternoon, I was about 15 or so, and I was eating with my family at Po Folks. I ordered a fried chicken thigh and hopefully something else, and when they brought it out, I remember that thing looked so good. But then my brain started to do this thing that it sometimes does. The thought that came to my brain, and this is going to sound so stupid, it was, this chicken thigh ain't no good. I hadn't even taken the first bite yet. I really don't know why my brain does that. It's like I'm frightened by the idea that this poor chicken has to get slaughtered, have its thighs chopped away, shipped 100 miles, thrown into a freezer for 2 days, doused with flour and seasonings, soaked in 400-degree fat grease, and finally delivered to the table where it will ultimately cease to be what it once was. And after all of that, after giving its life for this, to get to the end goal only to be told that it's no good. Only to be told that it didn't do what was expected of it. Of course I know that's extremely hyperbolic, because how often does that really happen? And even if it did, it's not like it's the chicken's fault. It would more than likely be bad ingredients or bad cooking, burnt grease, or maybe it just sat out too long. Furthermore, I would not even attempt to argue that expecting a chicken thigh to be good is an unfair expectation. You're paying money for it, you have the right to expect that. But then we also have to consider that whether or not the chicken thigh is good is a matter of opinion. The thing that really breaks my heart, though, about that statement, this chicken thigh ain't no good, is the word this. It's not stating that all chicken thighs are no good, it's just honing in on this one. Just this one in particular is no good, and I really hate the way that makes me feel. When I don't meet expectations, it's not people that failed, it's not people that are disappointing, it's just me. So why did my brain conjure that thought? As crazy as this might sound, I think I was just trying to upset myself to make sure that I was still alive. You know, that thing that everybody was saying around the turn of the century, you bleed just to know you're alive, I tear my heart open just to feel. I already knew that the best way to upset myself would be to hold some impossible expectation and then deride the object of that expectation for not meeting it. For what it's worth, that chicken thigh that day was scrumdiddlyumptious, and I hope that one day I can meet that chicken up in heaven and thank it for becoming a part of me. I remember this other time that we had just gotten back from a vacation, and we bought a couple of those little activity books. Do they even still make those? You know, the ones with word searches and mazes and stuff. My sister had one of these books, and she was working on one of the mazes in the book, and she couldn't figure it out. So the rest of us took a look, and sure enough, there was no way to get through this maze. So Dad taught her this little trick that you could do where you make an opening in one of the walls and just go through it. Later, she was trying another maze in that same book, and the exact same thing happened. Dad's response was, "Wow, we got a bad book." And I guess he was right, but still, I just felt bad for that little book. Here I go again, inanimate objects, I tell you. But it went through the whole process of being made, printed, shipped out, and taken happily to a cash register and given a home, a child to play with. But at the end of the day, it was a bad book. It was defective, and I identified with that. There was one morning, I think I was like 8 or 9 years old, I was just having one of my days. I'd conditioned myself to be quiet about my problems, but this one day I just couldn't hold it back, and before we left for school, I said something to the effect of that I didn't want to go to school because it felt like I was going to hell. Being part of a church-going family, it was a big deal to say something like that, but the answer I got really kind of doesn't surprise me either. The answer was, "Tim, you shouldn't say things like that." And so I just went back to being quiet. My problems were just imaginary. And I went on believing that for so long. I lost friends because of my attitude. I could play the whole card of, oh, it was instilled in me or whatever, but I had plenty of time to figure stuff out for myself, and I just kind of didn't. This is going to sound like I'm drama dumping, and it probably is, but it's the best way I know how to describe how expectations have played into my life. Growing up, I was constantly ridiculed because I just couldn't meet the expectation of me to look at people in the eyes. I was ridiculed because I couldn't meet the expectation to walk with my feet straight rather than pointed outward like a duck. I was ridiculed because I couldn't meet the expectation of pronouncing the letter S without lisping. I couldn't meet my dad's expectation of me to play sports. I couldn't meet the teacher's expectation of me to jump into the deep end of a swimming pool while watching every other kid in the class just do it. I couldn't meet the expectation of the other teacher who expected us to run laps around the gym indefinitely, and we weren't allowed to pass each other, so every time I started walking to catch my breath, this line of kids would build up behind me. So now it wasn't just the teacher's expectation I was failing to meet, it was all of theirs too. I couldn't meet the expectation of me to just hold still, to stop fidgeting, to stop rocking back and forth from one foot to the other. I got yelled at so many times for that. I couldn't meet the expectation to not have body odor because the brands of deodorant that my parents got me just didn't work. I figured out later in life that the clear waxy ones like Right Guard and Speed Stick don't work on me, only the white powdery ones like Degree and Secret. I guess back then nobody could figure out what the problem was, and one of the attempted explanations for said problem was that I must be standing under the shower stream and not actually cleaning myself. Yeah, Dad actually said that to me once. Disappointing people was a thing I just got used to. I'm glad that things aren't so much like that anymore, and rehashing all these stories doesn't feel like self-pity to me as much as it feels like just driving a point, if there even is one. But this is why I try not to hoist expectations, because of what they've done to me. I can't do that to someone else. The thought of being the root leaf scares me enough, but what scares me even more is being the Luke to someone else's root leaf. What's really funny is when I look back on times that I succeeded in life, none of those were things that I ever had any expectation of doing. I didn't expect to win the spelling bee in the 8th grade. I didn't expect to place first in the state of Georgia in typing. I didn't expect to run Celeste in under 40 minutes. I didn't expect to make a living off of YouTube, but these are all things that I definitely hoped for. It's just kind of funny how most of the success in my life was born of hope and not expectation. I don't know what that necessarily means, but again, this is just my experience. What the hell do I know? I hope this isn't coming across like I'm trying to spread misinformation or something here, because I can only speak as to what's going on in my head when I'm doing this stuff. I just don't think it's as simple as that our brains are wired differently, or that we process information slowly, or that we're overstimulated. Like, I'm sure that all that is true, and to some extent I think that is what's happening to me when I start fidgeting and things like that. But I feel like it's harder for people to understand if it's just an animalistic, automatic reaction that happens that's totally out of our control, that there's no thought process behind it, no psychological thing that you're thinking while you're doing it. And I'm trying to explain, what I'm thinking while I'm doing it. I'm trying to explain why I'm doing it, what's going on in my head as I'm doing it. Because if that's really all it was, if it was just something that I wasn't even aware that I was doing, then I wouldn't be so uncomfortable with the idea of taking a medication that would just turn it off, like a tic or something. But if these things I do are psychologically motivated, like they're a part of my personality, I don't want to turn off my personality. And I sure as heck don't want to become someone who is comfortable with hoisting demands, tailgating people, asking for Bel Airs 6 days later, making fun of people, expecting them to be normal, judging them for every little defect, and telling them to do better. I understand that in this world sometimes people need to be reprimanded, and boy do they ever, but that's not in my nature to do that. I can't even imagine what it's like to be comfortable doing that. And yet again, this could just be a me thing. Maybe for other people, it is just an animalistic thing. Maybe it is just an automatic response, and there's no actual reason. I'm not like a psychologist or anything, so I'm not an expert. I'm just trying to explain why I do it, and hope that maybe that explains why other people do it, and maybe other people can say, yes, this is why I do it too, and this is what I'm thinking too. I just want to give somebody an outlet for that, because I've never seen anybody say anything like this before. It's not, I haven't looked around super hard for it, but I don't know. So I just really want to kind of add that in there. If I sound different, it's because I'm adding this part in post, which how do you even know what part this part is? I don't know. We're moving on now. So this is kind of an awkward ending here. I assume I'm going to put this on the Bimothy Tishop channel. If I make that, I assume I will. So if you made it this far in the video, all I can say is thanks for dealing with my absolutely unhinged nonsense here. I don't know what other kind of stuff I'm going to do on this channel just yet. My other channel is Nintendo Capri Sun. That's where I do most of my stuff, like Let's Plays and all. But I wanted to kind of have a separate space for video essays and things like that, because I didn't want them to get dragged down by that channel, because I think the algorithm doesn't like that channel. And that happens to a lot of people, I guess. But I don't know. I don't know what this, necessarily making this channel, what the point of it is, but I'm hoping I can do more stuff on here. If there is anything in this video that you want me to elaborate on, leave it in the comments for sure, because a lot of this has just been an abridged version of my thoughts. While you're at it, you're more than welcome to subscribe and or drop a like, because I am just getting started, baby.